What would you do if your dog kept dragging home rocks that weren't from Earth? A farmer's dog kept bringing back strange, metallic-smelling rocks from the woods. At first, it was just a curiosity, one of those odd habits animals develop without reason. Dogs were scavengers by nature, and Max, loyal and restless, was no exception. Over the years, Dale had seen him drag home all kinds of things: an old horseshoe rusted to the color of dried blood, a half-buried bicycle pedal, even a sun-bleached deer skull gnawed at the edges by smaller creatures. But these rocks were different. They had a weight to them, not just in mass, but in presence. Their surfaces were dark and pitted, as if they had been burned by fire, yet cool to the touch. And then there was the smell, faint but persistent, like iron shavings mixed with something unfamiliar, something otherworldly. Dale didn't know it yet, but every time Max proudly dropped one at his feet, the dog wasn't just delivering a rock. He was delivering a message from the stars. Dale Henderson was a man built by the land he worked. His 200-acre farm in rural Kansas had been in the family for 3 generations, and it was both his anchor and his burden. The summers were long and unforgiving, the winters bitter and gray. Some years the crops were good and he could almost breathe easy. Other years the land seemed determined to crush him under its weight. Still, he stayed, rising before dawn, falling asleep to the chorus of cicadas, and convincing himself that persistence was its own kind of reward. That morning had been like countless others. The sky was pale and cloudless, the air thick with the scent of cut hay, and Dale was out by the north fence line, hammering a new post into the earth. His muscles ached, but his mind drifted elsewhere, to the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, to the grain prices he couldn't control, to the creeping feeling that, despite all his work, he was barely holding the farm together. That was when Max appeared. The German shepherd came bounding out of the tree line with the confidence of a soldier returning from a successful mission. His fur gleamed bronze in the sunlight, his tail cutting the air like a banner. Clenched in his powerful jaws was another one of those strange rocks. This one was larger than the rest, roughly the size of a man's fist, and streaked with silvery veins that caught the light as Max trotted closer. He laid it at Dale's boots, then sat back on his haunches, tongue lolling happily as if to say, "There, look what I found this time." Dale bent down, lifted the rock, and frowned. It was heavier than it looked, the weight pulling against his arm. He turned it over in his hand, studying the blackened crust and the metallic shimmer beneath. It didn't belong here. He knew that instinctively. He had walked this land since he was a boy, and he had never seen anything like it. Over the next few weeks, Max's behavior grew stranger. Every morning, as soon as the chores were done, the dog would vanish into the stretch of woodland bordering the farm. Sometimes he'd return after an hour. Other times it would be close to dusk before Dale saw him again, emerging from the shadows with mud clinging to his legs and burrs caught in his fur. Always, though, he carried another rock. By the end of the month, the porch had become a shrine of sorts. 12 stones stacked neatly in a row. Each one looked different, yet they all shared the same eerie qualities. Dense, metallic, and coated in a smooth, black crust that seemed almost artificial. Dale couldn't explain why, but he began to feel uneasy around them. Sometimes, when he stepped outside at night, the rocks seemed to glint faintly in the moonlight, as if they were absorbing the pale glow of the sky. He told himself it was just his imagination, but deep down, something about them felt alive. Finally, curiosity outweighed his hesitation. One sweltering afternoon, with sweat plastering his shirt to his back, Dale loaded all 12 rocks into the bed of his old Ford pickup. They clanked dully against the metal as he stacked them, heavier than any stones of their size had a right to be. The drive to the university was long and quiet, the landscape flattening into an endless patchwork of fields. With every mile, Dale's mind spun faster. He tried to keep his expectations low. Maybe they were just iron-rich deposits washed down from somewhere else. Maybe they were worthless curiosities, good for nothing more than conversation. But a part of him, small and stubborn, hoped for more. He thought about Max, about the dog's strange determination, and wondered if animals knew things people didn't. The geology lab smelled faintly of chalk dust and ozone. Its hallways were lined with glass cases displaying ancient fossils and glittering crystals, the kind of treasures pulled from the earth by people with patience and curiosity. Professor Lin Chen greeted him with a handshake that was firm but distracted, her eyes already drifting to the box of stones he carried. "Leave them here," she instructed, gesturing toward a steel table cluttered with microscopes and other samples. "I'll run some tests." Dale hesitated, reluctant to part with the rocks, but nodded. While Chen disappeared into a back room, he found himself pacing the corridor, his boots striking the linoleum with soft, rhythmic thuds. He imagined her in there, slicing into the stones, peering at them under magnification, and he wondered what she might find. His heart thudded with a mixture of dread and excitement he hadn't felt in years. Then, just as he was beginning to regret coming, his neighbor Jim arrived. Jim was a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a habit of speaking as though every word had to be wrestled out of him. He carried a cardboard box filled with rocks that looked almost identical to Dale's. "Found these in my east field," he muttered, setting the box down with a grunt. "Heard you were getting yours checked out. Figured I'd see what they were, too." Dale's stomach twisted. If Jim had them, too, maybe they weren't special after all. Maybe the land had just coughed up something strange, and they'd been too blind to notice it before. But when Professor Chen finally emerged, everything changed. She held a stack of papers like they were made of glass, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her composure. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice carrying both gravity and awe. "These aren't ordinary rocks. They're meteorites." Dale blinked, the word hanging in the air like a thunderclap. Meteorites? As in from space? Chen nodded, her sharp eyes glinting. "Not just any meteorites," she continued, "but extraordinarily preserved ones, rich in iridium and palladium. These metals are rarer than gold, and based on their composition—" She hesitated, as though savoring the moment. "You're sitting on top of one of the largest ancient impact sites ever discovered in North America." In the days that followed, Dale's quiet farm became unrecognizable. Geology teams descended with radar equipment and excavation rigs, their trucks carving new paths through his fields. Museums sent representatives offering contracts and checks so large they hardly seemed real. News outlets camped at the edge of his property, their cameras capturing every movement like it was a scene in a documentary. Collectors called at all hours, offering sums of money that made Dale's head spin. And through it all, Max became a star. The meteorite-hunting dog, they called him. His face splashed across newspapers and television screens. Children wrote letters to him, their crayon drawings depicting a heroic German shepherd leaping through the stars. At night, when the chaos finally quieted and the hum of machinery faded into the distance, Dale would sit on his porch with Max stretched out at his feet. He'd look up at the sky, the same sky he'd gazed at his whole life, and see it differently now. Those glittering points of light didn't just mark the edge of his world. They were the beginning of something vast and incomprehensible, something that had reached down and touched his little farm with a gift forged in fire. He'd scratch Max behind the ears and murmur, "You knew, didn't you?" And though the dog only wagged his tail in response, Dale couldn't shake the feeling that somehow Max really had known all along. How do you explain such an extraordinary bond?